Talk about how we can get people back to work here in the United States. And to do that, Dr. Howie Foreman, professor of management and public health at Yale, is joining us, as is our own Angelique Hamlani, who covers everyday COVID-19 for us. Dr. Foreman, good to have you here. I'm curious, we got the news from Governor Cuomo in New York yesterday that the state's going to try and put together a massive testing and tracing program, with former Mayor Bloomberg paying $10 million towards this, but also putting it together. How quickly can that be done, and how crucial is it?
Well, I think that Mayor Bloomberg has both the resources as well as the organizational skills to be able to put together a very large-scale program, which is critical at this point. And just to be clear, the testing piece has always been missing. We've needed to get to the point where we could be testing everybody who has symptoms and also being able to test people who are contacts. But as you tamp this down, as you get it to a point where instead of having 0.5% of the population having a new infection every day, you get it down to a more manageable number, that's when you really want to be able to put out the fire completely and at the same time mitigate the effects of relaxing lockdown restrictions so that we can move the economy forward.
Dr. Foreman, Angela here, good to see you again. Looking at the issues that we saw with the PCR testing, obviously it's more labor intensive and there are more supplies needed for that. How is it that the serological testing stands up to that? Because we know that that's what a lot of companies are relying on and looking at as the solution to getting back to work. Is there concerns about shortages there as well?
So shortages I'm less concerned about. I think we're at a point where we're going to have the testing capacity. We have very little validation of that right now. As you know, a lot of the testing that we're talking about has never gone through the FDA approval process. We've been sort of fast tracking this. We don't know very simple answers to questions like, does positive antibodies mean immunity? We don't know how much immunity it means, and we don't know how reliable those results are. So we must get those answers in the next few weeks. I'm less concerned about the capacity than I am getting the answers to those questions, which is the ultimate root of this.
It's Julie here. How do we get the answers to those questions? I mean, is that research ongoing? One of the things that has sort of continually struck me throughout this crisis is how disjointed the response feels from a layperson's perspective, whether it comes to testing or sourcing of PPE or the research to solve the questions that you're talking about. Is everyone talking to each other?
No, I mean, I think that that's been the most disheartening thing throughout this crisis, is the fact that we have no central coordination. And it's not to say that the federal government has to take over this entire process, but as you exactly pointed out, we want to be able to coordinate it. You want to be able to source materials from one part of the country to another, or from another country to our country, and get it to where it's needed most. We're not really doing that. We weren't doing it with the PPE front. We weren't doing it with the PCR front. And we're not coordinating our activities in terms of research so that places like Santa Clara County and UCLA are doing their own antibody testing. Mount Sinai is doing its own antibody testing. It's happening all. And they're adding information, but wouldn't it be nicer if each group was doing something different and answering different questions, and they can be coordinating both the questions and the answers to yield a greater sum?
As we're talking, some of the major pharmaceutical companies are actually producing vaccine at risk. This is not for the general public, but they're going to begin human trials in the fall and hopefully have something for us come January that they would then spend the next year inoculating all of us. Are you optimistic these vaccines will work? Because it can take several years to decades to develop an actual vaccine that works.
Yeah, so I'm relying on scientists. I'm not a vaccinologist and I'm not a virologist. I'm relying on scientists who have a lot of optimism that we can get a vaccine out. But even that still has hurdles to it. It's good to know that there are several different products that are moving along so that we can hope for at least one to be successful. And then I am optimistic that we will have something in that time frame, the 12 to 18 month time frame that has been repeated so often.
Hey, Dr. Foreman, I know that you've been watching what's been going on across the globe and watching closely how other countries are testing. What is it that you've seen that's been working really well, or things that maybe the governors should be considering right now?
Look, I think the most important thing would be to have lockdown for as long as possible to get it tamped down to a manageable number. South Korea has proven that. From top to bottom, we have 7 weeks in South Korea, and they are managing opening up the economy in a way that I have 100% confidence will work. It's not to say they won't have tiny little campfires break out, but they're not going to have another forest fire. We need to follow that pattern because 7 weeks is a achievable thing that doesn't break our economy. But if we have to go through 7 or 10 weeks and then do it again in 3 or 4 months, we have a disaster on our hands.
Hi, it's Brian Chung here. So what are the resources looking like for medical centers across the country? I know a lot of them are at universities like Yale, and there's been a lot of funding pressure because a lot of the universities have had to shift resources from those, relatively high revenue making clinics to fighting COVID-19. Are you seeing that the universities have enough resources right now, or do you think there's really a funding problem at those on the front lines here?
I think there's a big funding problem, and it varies considerably. There are some academic health centers and other health centers across the country that have had very large margins that have been able to make hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and those are going to be able to sustain themselves even if they take massive hits. There are other systems that lost money last year. I saw a public release from Lifespan in Rhode Island that had a public release yesterday saying that they lost more money in the last 4 weeks than they lost all of last year. Well, a health system that was already losing money last year now has real damage to it during a crisis like this. And we're going to have to figure out a way to shore these and the more rural and sparsely populated health centers across the country and sustain them.
Dr. Howard Foreman is a professor of management and public health at Yale. We appreciate your being here on Yahoo Finance. All the best to you and your team.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.